My name is Maria, and though it feels strange to admit it, beauty has always been a constant in my life. At 65, I still turn heads with my curvy figure, smooth complexion, and a radiant smile that captivates others. My thick gray hair cascades softly past my shoulders, and my warm honey brown eyes seem to hide a secret that draws people in. Despite leading a quiet life and distancing myself from romance since my husband's death, I still notice the glances and hear the murmurs wherever I go. But none of that holds any importance to me now. My days are peaceful, predictable even, and I've grown accustomed to this way of living. I've deliberately kept love at a distance. It's not that there haven't been suitors, there have been plenty. Men of all ages, from distinguished gray haired gentlemen to those young enough to be my sons, have tried to win me over, but I always decline, telling myself I'm too old for the complexities of love. Deep down, though, I know the truth. My heart has been locked away. I've experienced loss, and the thought of opening myself up to that pain again is terrifying. One evening, as the setting sun painted the sky in soft hues of orange and pink, my phone rang. It was Greg, my nephew. Greg, my elder sister's only child, is in his mid-30s, brimming with energy and sporting a mischievous grin that hints at trouble. With his tall, athletic build and confident swagger, he has a way of attracting attention, particularly from women. My sister Lucy often called me to vent about his flirtatious nature. "Maria," she'd sigh, "this boy is going to be the death of me. He just won't stop chasing women." I'd laugh it off, assuring her it was just a phase young men go through. Yet, I always knew Greg was different. His charm and magnetic personality made it almost impossible for women to resist him, even when they should have known better. "Hi, Aunt Maria." Greg's cheerful voice came through the phone. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," I replied. "What's going on?" "I was wondering if I could spend the weekend at your place. I just need a break from everything," he said, his tone hesitating slightly. I paused, surprised. Greg rarely made such requests. It wasn't like him to ask for a place to stay without a clear reason, especially considering how busy his social and professional life usually kept him. My home, a quiet retreat, tucked away from the city's hustle and bustle, offered serenity, a cozy space with a backyard garden. It was the opposite of the excitement someone like Greg typically enjoyed. Yet there was something in his voice that made me reconsider. It wasn't a casual request. It carried an undertone of unspoken need. After a moment, I responded warmly, "Of course, Greg. You're always welcome here. This is your home, too." "Thanks, Aunt Maria," he replied, his voice lighter. "I'll be there Friday evening." As the call ended, curiosity washed over me. What was he escaping from? Was it a relationship gone awry? A misunderstanding with his mother? Or something else entirely? Greg had always been a bit of an enigma, full of surprises and layers that made him hard to figure out. I couldn't help but wonder what had prompted him to seek refuge here and what this weekend might reveal. The days flew by, and before I knew it, Friday evening arrived. Sitting in the living room, I heard the sound of Greg's car pulling into the driveway. Rising to greet him, I felt both anticipation and unease. As I opened the door, there he was, familiar, yet slightly changed, dressed in dark jeans and a fitted black t-shirt that highlighted his athletic build. Greg looked effortlessly handsome. His smile was as warm and bright as ever, but his eyes carried something new, a flicker of restlessness and quiet tension that didn't match his usual confident demeanor. "Aunt Maria!" he exclaimed with affection, pulling me into a warm hug. "You look amazing as always." I chuckled, amused by his endless charm. And you're just as smooth as ever, I replied with a laugh. Come in. Let's get you settled. As Greg stepped inside, his gaze swept over the familiar surroundings. The cozy living room, bathed in the soft glow of warm lighting, welcomed him. The aroma of freshly baked bread still lingered in the air, adding to the comforting atmosphere. My home had always been a peaceful haven, a place where one could breathe easier. Yet tonight, as Greg looked around, I sensed he was searching for something, a moment of peace amidst inner chaos. What had brought him here, and what was he hoping to find this weekend? I suspected I would soon find out. Wow, he said, sinking into the couch with a sigh, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. I've really missed this place. I laughed, teasing, You're acting like it's been years since you were last here. Leaning back and briefly closing his eyes, he replied, Well, it feels like it. Life's been so hectic. I haven't had a moment to breathe. I raised an eyebrow, my interest piqued, but I stayed quiet, hoping Greg would continue. Instead, he gave a faint smile and shook his head, as though he wasn't ready to open up just yet. As the evening progressed, we stepped out into the garden, where a gentle breeze stirred the leaves and carried the sweet fragrance of blooming flowers. The peaceful atmosphere seemed to ease him, and eventually he began to talk more freely. We sat together in a companionable silence, the soft rustling of leaves and chirping of crickets creating a soothing backdrop. At last, Greg spoke. You know, Aunt Maria, he began, his voice quieter than usual. Sometimes it feels like I'm trapped in this endless cycle. The parties, the women. It's fun at first, but after a while, it all just becomes exhausting. His confession took me by surprise. This wasn't the Greg I knew, the confident, carefree young man whose charm seemed effortless. Now, he was revealing a vulnerable side I hadn't seen before. A wave of concern swept over me as I realized the weight he'd been carrying. I took a moment to consider his words before replying gently, Maybe it's time for a change, Greg. He sighed, his gaze wandering as he stared out into the garden. Maybe, he said softly, but it's not that simple. People have all these expectations of me, you know? It feels like I can't step off the path they've set for me without letting them down. I moved closer, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. Greg, I said, my tone steady yet kind. You don't have to live up to anyone else's expectations. You're still young. You have time to figure out what you want and to live your life on your terms. For a long moment, he held my gaze, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that caught me off guard. There was something unspoken in that look, something that made my heart skip a beat and left me unsettled, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. The weekend unfolded in a series of quiet, serene moments and long conversations. Greg, initially reserved, began to relax as the days went on, and I found myself feeling unexpectedly at ease in his presence. It was a welcome surprise, something I hadn't anticipated, but I started to appreciate his company more than I thought possible. Yet there were fleeting moments, subtle but undeniable, when I caught him looking at me in a way that stirred something deep inside. It wasn't overt or obvious, just a lingering glance or a soft smile that carried an unspoken depth. Greg's visit turned out to be unexpectedly heartwarming in ways I hadn't imagined. His vibrant energy and laughter filled my home, breathing new life into spaces that had long been quiet. His playful nature made me feel lighter, as if the years had briefly fallen away. One afternoon, as we worked in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner, I couldn't help but smile at how effortlessly he brought joy to simple tasks. His hands moved with practiced ease, but every now and then he'd pause, pop a slice of cucumber into his mouth, and flash me a cheeky grin. You're spoiling me, I teased, half joking, half sincere. He winked playfully, his expression warm. "You deserve it, Aunt Maria," he replied affectionately. "You're always doing so much for others. It's about time someone took care of you for a change." His words struck a chord, warming me in a way I hadn't expected. It had been so long since anyone had made me feel truly cared for. Greg's actions, brewing the perfect cup of tea, fixing little things around the house, spoke volumes. He made me feel seen and appreciated in a way I hadn't experienced in years. And I realized just how much I had missed that kind of attention. But it wasn't just his kindness that left a mark. His playful side had a lasting effect, too. His lightheartedness was contagious and often caught me off guard. He had a knack for sneaking up on me, wrapping me in a sudden hug, or pressing a light kiss to my cheek or the back of my neck. Each time I'd gasp in surprise, only to hear his teasing yet affectionate voice. "Aunt Maria, you're always so serious. You need to loosen up a bit," he'd say. I'd laugh, swatting at him playfully, but the warmth of his touch lingered long after, occupying my thoughts in ways I couldn't explain. One evening, I was curled up on the couch, engrossed in a book, when Greg flopped down beside me with his usual carefree air. Without hesitation, he slung an arm over my shoulders and leaned in to glance at the pages. "Is it a love story?" he asked, his voice low and teasing, tinged with curiosity. "It's none of your business," I shot back, my cheeks flushing as I felt his gaze on me, his proximity making me acutely aware of him. Greg chuckled at my reaction, his laughter deep and rich, sending an unexpected shiver through me. He shifted closer, his fingers brushing lightly against my arm as he adjusted his position. The brief contact sent a jolt through my body, and I quickly stood up, pretending to adjust the curtains to hide the unease that suddenly washed over me. "You're too restless," I muttered, aiming for an annoyed tone, even though my heart was pounding wildly in my chest. "You love it," he replied, his voice filled with mischief, accompanied by that playful, knowing grin that made my breath catch. I didn't respond, choosing instead to turn away, but I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling he left behind. Days went by, but the effect of Greg's presence lingered. His casual touches, the way his gaze seemed to linger on me, and the unspoken intimacy in his actions began to affect me in ways I struggled to control. It wasn't just what he said or did, it was how he made me feel. For the first time in years, I felt alive, awakened to a sensation I hadn't realized was missing. I found myself looking forward to his hugs, his teasing remarks, and even the way his mere presence stirred something within me. The excitement and longing were becoming harder to ignore. One quiet night, when the house was still, except for the hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional chirping of crickets, I was alone in the kitchen, putting away dishes. The sound of footsteps behind me made me turn to see Greg entering. His muscular chest and arms were bare, and the dim light above cast soft shadows over his skin. The sight of him, so unguarded and confident, sent my heart racing for reasons I couldn't quite define. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice softer than usual, almost as if he was trying to breach the distance I had created. "Not really," I replied, stealing a quick glance at him before looking away, feeling the weight of his gaze. He stepped closer, leaning casually against the counter. Though his posture seemed relaxed, his eyes searched mine, waiting for me to meet him halfway. "You've been quiet today," he observed, his tone gentle but edged with concern. "Is everything okay?" I nodded, but the tightness in my chest betrayed me. There was a tension in the air between us, heavy and palpable, wrapping around us like an invisible force. His eyes, magnetic in their intensity, drew me in, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, thick with expectation. Finally, Greg broke it. "You know, Aunt Maria," he began, his voice soft but weighted. "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever known." "Greg, don't say things like that," I whispered, my voice barely audible as my eyes darted away from his, unable to face the intensity there. "Why not?" he asked, his voice steady yet tinged with vulnerability that made it hard for me to push him away. "It's the truth." He took another step forward, his hand moving slowly, almost cautiously, as if giving me a chance to stop him. But I didn't. His fingers brushed a strand of hair from my face, and the light touch set off a cascade of sensations I couldn't control, a pull I couldn't resist. "Greg, this isn't—" I started, but he cut me off before I could finish. "This isn't what?" he asked, his voice now a low murmur, but it carried a certainty that left me speechless. My heart raced, and my thoughts spun in a chaotic swirl of conflicting emotions. I opened my mouth to protest, to say something to halt what was happening, but no words came out. Instead, I stood there, frozen, as his hand moved to my waist. The heat of his touch burned through my clothing, drawing me closer to him, closer than I had ever imagined. I felt the strength of his arms as they wrapped around me, his warmth radiating against me, igniting something deep inside that I had buried long ago. The space between us vanished, leaving only the rapid beat of my heart and the undeniable pull of his presence. "Greg, we can't," I whispered, my voice trembling. But even as I said the words, I didn't move away. My body betrayed me, staying pressed against his. His lips brushed against my cheek, so near to my mouth that I could feel the warmth of his breath on my skin. The soft touch made my breath hitch, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. The stillness stretched, heavy and charged with unspoken desires. I didn't know how long we stayed like that, neither of us moving or breaking the silence. The words we didn't say filled the space between us, thick with meaning. Finally, I stepped back, my chest heaving with uneven breaths, my heart pounding in my ears. "Good night, Greg," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, trembling with emotions I couldn't name. He didn't try to stop me as I turned and walked away, but I could feel his eyes on me, heavy and unrelenting, following my every step. It was as though he was waiting for me to turn back, to change my mind. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. That night, I lay awake, my thoughts racing, the moment replaying over and over in my mind. What had I done? What was happening between us? I tried convincing myself it was nothing, just a fleeting emotion that would fade with time. But deep down, I knew better. Something had shifted, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. There was no going back. I didn't want to admit it, but the truth was becoming harder to deny. I started craving Greg's attention in ways I hadn't before. His touch, his presence, the way his gaze lingered on me. That look made me feel beautiful, desired, in a way I hadn't experienced for years. I tried to push these thoughts aside, but they kept returning, each time more intense, more impossible to suppress. It felt like I was playing with fire, a dangerous game I knew I shouldn't continue. Yet, a small part of me couldn't help but wonder what might happen if I didn't stop. What if I let it unfold? What if I gave in to the pull I felt? The next morning, Greg seemed as carefree and playful as ever, acting as if nothing had changed, as though the previous night hadn't happened. But when our eyes met, there was an unspoken acknowledgement between us, a spark neither of us could deny. It was subtle, hovering just beneath the surface, but it lingered, a quiet recognition of the moment we had shared. As the days passed, the tension between us grew, like a slow-burning fire that couldn't be extinguished. Greg's touches became more deliberate, his words teasing but carrying a weight that made my heart race. Despite my efforts to resist, I was drawn to him. The way he made me feel, the way he awakened desires I had long suppressed, was overwhelming. One sweltering afternoon, I decided that a cool shower would be the perfect escape from the heat. My room was serene, the stillness broken only by the faint hum of the outside world. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting soft patterns on the walls, creating an almost dreamlike calm. I slipped out of my clothes, letting them fall to the floor, and wrapped myself in a soft white towel. Its cool texture soothed my skin, and I held it close, enjoying the sensation. My hair was loosely tied back, with a few strands framing my face, giving me an unintentional air of casual ease that seemed to match the peaceful moment. I was just about to step into the bathroom when I remembered that I had left my phone on the coffee table in the living room. It didn't seem urgent. The phone had been ringing incessantly, but nothing suggested it was pressing. I decided it could wait. But just as I was about to turn the bathroom knob, I heard soft, deliberate footsteps outside my door. The sound stopped, followed by a hesitant knock. "Aunt Maria?" Greg's voice called from the other side. Before I could respond, the door creaked open. There he stood in the doorway, holding my phone in his hand. For a moment, his eyes locked with mine, and he seemed momentarily taken aback. "Your phone's been—" His words trailed off as his gaze shifted, falling on me. I stood there, wrapped in nothing but a towel, my skin still damp from the shower. The steam clung to me, making my bare shoulders glisten faintly. I watched the surprise register on his face, his eyes widening as he froze. His mouth opened as though to finish his sentence, but no words came. In that moment, my pulse quickened, my heart pounding against my ribcage. The room, which had felt so spacious just moments ago, seemed to close in around us. The air grew heavier with every passing second. "Greg?" I whispered, my voice barely audible, but it was enough to break the silence. My throat tightened, and I couldn't say more. Before I could process what was happening, Greg moved. His steps were quick, deliberate, and before I knew it, he was standing directly in front of me. His strong hands reached up, gently cupping my face with a firmness that was both tender and assertive. His fingers traced the line of my jaw as his eyes bore into mine, searching as if looking for something deeper, a connection that now seemed undeniable. "Aunt Maria, I can't hold back anymore," he murmured, his voice low, filled with raw emotion and desperation. And then, without any further warning, he kissed me. The kiss wasn't at all what I'd expected. It was electric, charged with an intensity that left me breathless. His lips were soft, but insistent, moving against mine with a fierce tenderness I couldn't resist. For a moment, I stood frozen, unable to react, shocked by what was happening. My mind struggled to keep up with my racing heart, but as his hand slid from my face to my waist, pulling me closer, something inside me shifted. A longing, a deep-seated hunger I hadn't recognized until that instant, awakened within me. "Greg," I whispered, breaking the kiss just enough to speak. But he didn't let me finish. His lips found mine again, silencing me with a deep, passionate kiss that left me trembling. This time, it was more intense, more urgent, the moment wrapping around us like a heavy blanket. The towel I clutched slipped slightly, its hold weakening under the growing tension, and instinctively, I pulled it tighter. But Greg's hands were already there, steady and sure, holding me as if I were something precious, something he had been longing for. "I've wanted this for so long," he murmured, his voice raw and filled with yearning, almost hoarse. His confession washed over me like a wave, sending an electric thrill through every nerve in my body. Before I could think too much, my instincts took control. Without hesitation, my arms wrapped around his neck, pulling him closer. Our bodies came together with an ease that surprised me, as though this moment had been waiting for us. I kissed him back, the urgency in my response catching even me off guard, as if this had been building for years. The warm afternoon sun, once gentle, now seemed to blaze brighter, its rays intensifying as we lost ourselves in each other's presence. Time seemed to stretch, the outside world fading until only the two of us remained, tangled in this reckless intimacy. Eventually, the towel slipped entirely, falling to the floor in a forgotten heap. Maria? He breathed, his voice thick with awe as his eyes met mine. There was a depth in his gaze that left me breathless. His fingertips traced the curves of my body with such reverence, as though he were memorizing every inch. Each touch was tender, deliberate. I knew in the back of my mind how risky this was, how forbidden it felt. A part of me screamed to stop, to pull away before we crossed a line we couldn't uncross. But in that moment, all reason and restraint melted away. All I could feel was the overwhelming rush of being alive, alive in a way that made me feel cherished and desired, something I hadn't felt in so long. Greg's touch was warm and steady, his hands sliding down my back, tracing every curve with such care that it sent shivers through me. My body responded in ways I hadn't anticipated as his lips brushed against my neck, soft and lingering, sending waves of heat through me that left me trembling. "Maria," he whispered, his voice low and trembling near my ear. The intimacy in his tone made my heart race. "You're so beautiful. I've never seen anyone like you." The way he said my name, the tenderness in his voice, made my heart skip a beat. A blush crept across my cheeks as I looked up at him, his intense gaze locking onto mine. It was fierce, filled with emotion, and it left me breathless. Slowly, he leaned in again, his lips capturing mine in a kiss that was deeper, more meaningful. It was full of unspoken promises, passion, and longing that seemed to echo between us. As the kiss deepened, Greg's hands roamed over my arms, shoulders, and down to my waist. His touch was both gentle and firm, pulling me closer into his embrace, as though he never wanted to let me go. The warmth of his body pressed against mine, his heartbeat steady and strong, resonated in my chest, reminding me that we were both here, fully present in this moment. "Greg," I whispered, my voice trembling with the weight of my emotions. But he silenced me with another kiss, deeper and more consuming, as if he couldn't get enough. His lips moved against mine with a confidence that left me breathless. His hand cupped my face, his thumb brushing gently over my skin, while his eyes locked onto mine with an expression that was both tender and intense. "I've dreamed of this," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "Of holding you, being close to you. You have no idea what you mean to me." His words, raw and vulnerable, made my heart ache in the best way, unlocking a flood of emotions I hadn't realized I was holding back. My trembling fingers reached up to trace the line of his jaw, marveling at how real, how solid he felt. It was as though he was the answer to something I hadn't known I was missing. "I didn't know I could feel like this again," I admitted, my voice shaky with emotion, the vulnerability making my chest tighten. "You deserve to feel this way," Greg said, his voice steady and filled with intensity that left no room for doubt. "You deserve to be loved, to be cherished, to feel wanted. You deserve this, Maria." His words wrapped around me like a promise. And in that moment, I knew I was ready to let go of everything that had been holding me back. The moment felt surreal, as though we were suspended in a world of our own, the only two people who existed. The golden sunlight streaming through the windows bathed the room in warmth, amplifying the magic of the moment. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, his voice filled with care as his eyes searched mine for any sign of hesitation or doubt. He seemed to be waiting for a response, as though he could sense the whirlwind of emotions inside me. I don't know, I admitted, my voice quieter now, raw with honesty. But I don't regret it. Not at all. Greg's smile was soft and filled with warmth. He reached out to brush a stray lock of hair from my face, his touch familiar and tender. Neither do I, he said simply, his words carrying an unspoken promise of more. For a while, we lay together, the weight of the outside world forgotten, as we savored the closeness and intimacy of the moment. The silence between us was comforting, filled with an understanding that, for once, nothing else mattered except the bond we shared. But as time passed and the golden light of the afternoon began to fade, reality crept in. The significance of what had happened slowly began to take hold, unsettling the calm that had enveloped me. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself sitting in the garden, the cool evening breeze brushing against my skin, carrying with it the faint fragrance of blooming flowers. I perched on the edge of the stone bench, my thoughts racing as I tried to make sense of everything. What did this mean for us? Had we crossed a boundary we could never undo? Could things ever return to how they once were? Or had something irreversible shifted between us? The uncertainty gnawed at me, the weight of it pressing heavily on my chest. Lost in thought, I stared into the distance, wondering what the future might hold. Greg entered quietly, his presence a calming contrast to the storm of emotions swirling within me all day. He had this uncanny ability to still my thoughts. Yet whenever he was near, the feelings I was fighting so hard to suppress surged back to the surface, impossible to ignore. Aunt Maria, Greg began, his voice steady yet soft, carrying a mix of gentleness and unyielding resolve. I know this is complicated, but I don't regret anything that happened today. More than that, I don't want it to end here, not like this. I turned to face him, my heart weighed down by conflicting emotions. Confusion, guilt, desire, and a longing I couldn't deny. His words, though calm, sent a ripple of unease through me. Greg, this isn't just complicated, it's wrong, I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. His gaze held mine without hesitation, a fire burning in his eyes that made it clear he wasn't about to back down. Why? He challenged, his tone firm yet questioning. Is it because of what others might think? Because of the age difference between us? I paused, struggling to steady my breath. The truth was, it wasn't about what others might say or the years that separated us. It wasn't about any of the things I thought should matter. No, I whispered, my voice barely audible. None of that matters to me. What matters is how I feel about you. That's what makes this so hard to process. His words hit me deeply, beyond anything I could articulate. He was being honest, raw, and the sincerity in his eyes was undeniable. I wanted to believe him, to let myself follow wherever this strange and terrifying path might lead. But fear held me back. Fear of judgment, of what I was risking, of losing control. Days passed, but the tension between us only grew, lingering in every room we shared. Greg, ever patient, gave me the space I needed, yet he never allowed me to forget that his feelings hadn't changed. He didn't push, but he didn't withdraw either. Despite my attempts to create distance and quiet the emotions stirring within me, I couldn't escape the pull I felt whenever he was near. That moment, the heat we had shared, had altered something fundamental between us. I could feel it in the air whenever he was close, in the way the space seemed to hum with unspoken possibilities. But I didn't know if I had the courage to confront it, to embrace it, or if fear would ultimately drive us apart. That evening, the air felt thick with unspoken words, so heavy I couldn't focus on anything else. I sat on the couch trying to distract myself with the television, but my mind kept wandering back to him, back to us. I didn't hear him approach, but somehow I sensed his presence before he spoke. "Aunt Maria," he said softly, his voice carrying both hesitation and determination. I looked up to see him standing there, his expression open and vulnerable, yet underpinned by a quiet strength. His eyes locked onto mine, searching for something, understanding, reassurance, maybe both. Without a word, he sat beside me, closing the distance between us. I could feel the warmth of his body, his proximity spreading heat through me. "I don't want to keep pretending," Greg confessed, his voice low but clear. "I can't act like nothing happened when all I can think about is you." His words hung in the air, their weight settling heavily on my chest. He didn't look away, waiting for me to respond, but I was overwhelmed, unable to find the words. "Greg, this isn't easy for me," I said finally, my voice trembling. "I've lived my life so carefully, so cautiously, and now everything feels so different, so overwhelming." He gave me a gentle, understanding look. "Maybe it's time for something different," he said softly, his voice calm and reassuring. He reached for my hand, his fingers wrapping around mine with a warmth that steadied me in a way I hadn't expected. I looked at him then, truly looked at him. Beyond the charming young man I had known for so long, I saw someone who cared for me deeply, not just as family, not just as his aunt, but as a woman. Someone who saw me for all I was and all I could still become. In that moment, something shifted within me, like a quiet wave rolling through my soul, changing everything in its path. Without fully thinking, I leaned toward him, drawn by a force I couldn't resist. The small space between us disappeared as my lips met his in a kiss that was hesitant at first, soft and uncertain. But it quickly deepened, the world around us fading into nothing. His hands moved to cup my face, his thumbs brushing gently over my cheeks, sending shivers through me. The kiss wasn't just an act. It was an expression of all the unspoken emotions that had built between us, a silent promise we both understood. He kissed me as though I were the only person who mattered, the only thing worth his attention in that moment. When we finally pulled away, breathless and wide-eyed, his gaze met mine with an intensity that made my heart race. The depth in his eyes sent a thrill through me, leaving me shaken yet unable to look away. From that moment, everything between us changed. There was no going back, no pretending things could ever be the same. Greg and I began finding ways to steal moments together. Quiet, private intervals where time seemed to stretch and slow. Whether we were side by side in the kitchen, laughter filling the room, strolling leisurely through the garden, or simply sitting on the couch, the world outside faded away. Each moment we shared felt like a precious gem, something small yet immeasurably valuable. Greg's thoughtfulness shone through in countless ways, both big and small, as he constantly found new methods to show how much I meant to him. He would surprise me with flowers he'd picked from the garden, their vibrant hues standing out starkly against the simplicity of our quiet lives. Sweet, handwritten notes would appear in unexpected places, on the kitchen counter, or tucked between the pages of my book, always at just the right time. And whenever we were alone, his hand would always find mine, his fingers lacing through mine as though he was holding on to something he couldn't bear to let go of. One evening, we sat outside beneath a vast sky, studded with stars. Greg turned to me, his expression serious, yet thoughtful. The night air was cool, but his presence beside me filled me with warmth that radiated to my very core. "I need you to know something," he began, his voice steady yet brimming with raw emotion. "I'm not going anywhere. Whatever happens, no matter the challenges we face, I'm here. I'm with you." Tears welled in my eyes, the weight of his words sinking deeply into my heart. Reaching for his hand, I clasped it tightly. "Greg, you've brought so much light into my life," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I can't imagine what I'd do without you. He smiled softly, a smile that tugged at my heart and filled it with love. You'll never have to find out, he said gently, pulling me into his arms. In that moment, wrapped in the warmth of his embrace, I knew with absolute certainty that we were in this together, no matter what lay ahead. Our love grew into something profoundly intimate, a cherished secret that became our own. It was a bond that deepened with every passing day, one we nurtured and protected fiercely. We both knew the world around us might never truly understand the depth of what we shared, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the solace we found in one another, the quiet comfort of simply being together. In each embrace, our hearts, once burdened by life's complexities, grew lighter. Greg's presence brought a vibrancy back to my existence, rekindling a spark I thought had long since faded. For the first time in many years, I dared to hope again, allowing myself to believe in the possibility of happiness. In his arms, I discovered a love that was both tender and fierce, one that was undeniably real and uniquely ours. It was a love with its own rhythm and heartbeat, something we held close and shielded from the rest of the world.